Hello, everyone. I thought I would make an update to continue the story that I was telling regarding this situation. Now, for those of you who have come in late, I am ever so sorry. But let me give you a fast recount of the situation that has led us to the point where Liana Kerzner essentially called the police twice on my husband to very much endanger him, to the point that on the second visit, we had 3 policemen showing at our doorstep. I know the camera doesn't capture all of them. You can only see the hints of 2, but there was a third policeman standing behind the officer who spoke to Asher. The catalyst for all of this, because I do not say it is the cause, as I now believe the causes were deeply entrenched long before this happened, but I may talk about that later. The catalyst for this was an argument that Asher had with Poppy Diabolique. In that argument, Asher observed that Poppy was being extremely manipulative, rhetorically speaking. The way she was manipulating the argument was not in good faith. Poppy allegedly drew a boundary and retreated from the conversation, throwing an accusation of gish gallop at Asher. Asher, thinking that Poppy was holding her own boundary and having exited the conversation, proceeded to, in the public thread that they interacted, which was not started by Poppy, defend himself against the accusations of a gish gallop by showing exactly how his arguments were all concatenated. Poppy came back, accused Asher of crossing a boundary, at which point Asher immediately knew what kind of game Poppy was playing and pointed out that that was being manipulative. Poppy, not being to counter that, went to her audience and blasted Asher, and abusing her role as a therapist, diagnosed Asher as, quote, splitting, which is a term for borderline personality disorder people who are suffering what is called a depedestaling of someone. I need to point out it is extremely unethical for anyone in the therapeutic sphere to lob that accusation at someone that is not being treated by them. And Poppy, up until very recently, constantly put on her profile that she had a master's in #counseling, and she's always been very proud of that, so her public figure is tied to her capacity as a counselor. So there is no mistaking the context in which this happened. Following that, Asher was very angry at Poppy essentially abusing a position where she had ethical responsibilities to people with mental health issues and weaponized that role. He complained to Liana, especially that Poppy had been dismissive. Now, Poppy herself also has a borderline personality disorder, so she is very aware of what a dismissive attitude feels like to people with personality disorders, especially borderline, which was something Asher was appealing to in the conversation, pointing that out and mimicking Poppy's language, because Poppy in the past has said, my BPD tells me this, my BPD tells me that. So Asher, showing that he actually listened to Poppy and how she used language, used her same kind of language. This is something that Liana Kerzner, someone who does not listen to people, then proceeded to weaponize in the very ugly fight. I'm getting to that now. Liana Kerzner proceeded to further add to the dismissal and delegitimization of Asher by, in her completely unqualified, because again, she's not a therapist and she has no qualifications, opinion, it really looked like a split to her. Asher, feeling now the onset of an actual split, which she didn't have with Poppy, did what every borderline with the condition who has developed coping skills and therapeutic skills did. He completely cut off contact with Liana. He blocked her and he went off the internet for 3 weeks. Now, this may seem extreme for you, but yes, people with borderline personality disorders have very intense emotions. Now, the reason Asher did what he did is because, as he told me and he told his therapist, he knew that in that moment where he was splitting on Liana, if he had acted or said anything, it would have resulted in a truly ugly moment that would most likely have been devastating for both of them. Because in those instances, you are not yourself, you are a raw nerve. So Asher actually did what you're supposed to do. When someone decompensates like that, you are expected, within a framework of managing your disorder, to put yourself out of the situation so in order to minimize harm for all involved, especially the sufferer. During the time that Asher was recovering, Liana did make a fuss about him not being reachable because he was the web host. But again, a web host doesn't have that much to do. We did nothing. He did nothing as far as site maintenance because that is the purview of the site designer, and Novelty Factor does not provide that service. Now, throughout the entire time that she had been a customer of Novelty Factor, there was really nothing much to do. No issues whatsoever. She bizarrely did float the notion that Asher needed to be reachable, to which point I said that, well, anything that needed to be known or dealt with, it was something I could do or communicate to Asher. In her Patreon video, she has essentially implied that Asher left her communicating with a family member, leaving out that it was the husband, and implying that Asher essentially put her in contact with his poor elderly mother or spinster aunt or whatever, instead of the person who, built the website, the person who handles a good amount of the web hosting side on my things too. And let's not forget, I did 90% of the technical work on the game. I implemented all of the systems. So I was more than qualified to learn anything I needed to learn or do anything I needed to do to help her. But Liana needed Asher to be there. It was a control thing. When Asher came back 3 weeks later and he apologized to Liana, Liana essentially upended on him an enormous amount of verbal abuse. Now, Liana Kerzner has claimed that this was a business correspondence and that therefore we doxed her by posting this chat on the internet, but no, it wasn't. If you look at the entire thing, I want to ask you what kind of a business correspondence includes Liana Kerzner making fun of my husband's intelligence, insulting his worldview, or mocking in 3 separate occasions his father's suicide by alcoholic starvation. Because I want to know what kind of business you run when you do that. So no, it was an argument between friends, and if you read the entire transcript, you will know that Liana has lied for 6 months up until the time we published the full transcript about that conversation, which she calls a very ugly fight. And she has pretended that Asher was abusive and completely devoid of empathy, and that we both upended and called her names and were abusive, and you don't see any of that there, nor on any of the transcripts that I shared of my exchanges with her. In fact, if you look at the entire transcript, it is 3 days of Asher desperately trying to build bridges and Liana coming in like a fucking wrecking ball and being incredibly cruel, demeaning, insulting, clearly looking for a way to hurt him. And it is my theory, she wanted Asher to spin out. She wanted Asher to decompensate again. She wanted Asher to be extremely ugly to her so that she could get something she could screen cap and go, see, what a monster he is. People who have read through the transcript tell me that most of the time they end up balling their fists in fury at seeing what Liana is doing to Asher. And then in the second apology, when Asher apologized for the second time with a very, very thorough recap of what he thought was what Liana was trying to tell him. He wasn't agreeing with her. He was essentially showing that he listened. Liana's demeanor changed 180 completely, which, again, is very important to the latter half of this episode. And it is at that moment that Liana Kerzner apologized. She did not apologize for insulting Asher's intelligence, for calling him names, for dismissing him, for being exceedingly cruel and mocking his father's suicide. She apologized for miscalculating. That is the moment that we saw the mask fall. That's the moment we understood everything. And that's the reason we deleted our conversations with her, because we knew we were in the face of an abuser. Liana Kerzner claims that we deleted the chats because we were covering our tracks. No, we downloaded everything and then deleted them because we do not want an abuser to have access to us. Asher pointed out that he may have said everything that she was saying to him to show that he was listening, but that he did not necessarily agree with all of it. And at that point of the conversation, you will see her doing an oh. And then Asher, when she desperately points out that, yeah, see, I apologize, in the most completely self-unaware way, pointing that she had apologized for miscalculating, but not actually for anything she did, not anything she said, none of the brutality. Asher said one thing: "Do you want a reward?" Now that, if you go to the very beginning of that conversation, in day 1 or 2, by the way, Liana implies that Asher apologizing is him looking for an emotional reward. It's right there in the chat. So when Liana did her nonsense apology, because it's a non-apology, Asher essentially returned her very language in a much nicer way, I might add, than what she said. And wouldn't you know it, she quoted that part of the exchange to other people, saying he was completely devoid of empathy. He even quoted it to Bianca in their episode Red Flags on Friendship, in a completely, absolutely self-unaware way, because she was talking about herself. Once it was clear that the friendship was done, and we didn't want anything to do with her, she was going to cancel the game. She never consulted with us on the contents of the cancellation video. So when that mess of a cancellation video, allegedly written by a PR expert, which no, it wasn't, because I've shown that video to multiple people who were PR experts, and they go, this is a nightmare. This is clearly someone airing grievances under the thin veneer of professionalism that no one in our firm would ever work for us after making a video like that. And in that cancellation video, Liana Kerzner threw everything at Asher's feet. Asher was never involved in the project, but she blamed a very public shot at a trans woman that she deemed transphobic, which it wasn't. Incidentally, the trans woman in question has now been accused by pretty much a legion of ex-girlfriends of being manipulative. So, and all of them are trans women. So are you going to tell me that a legion of trans women are transphobic? Go ahead and give that a try, please. And then Liana Kerzner proceeded to blame the delays exclusively on my husband's mental health struggles, which, according to her narrative, were affecting my productivity. Immediately preceding that, Liana Kerzner started making videos targeting us. Subtly. For example, the week after the video launched, she made a video about men's tears. And in that video, she describes 2 men who came to her crying, and saying that she hadn't made them cry. Asher wept when Liana essentially threw that horrible jab at his father's death. Right there, which you can see here. She can't claim, oh, it's taken out of context. It's manipulated. This is a photo I took of that exchange the moment it happened. You can see the screen right here. And it matches the exported chats. So, of course, in the video, like she does in every video, and you need to be conscious of this now that it's happening, she extracts herself from the situation that she's describing. She becomes the observer of this phenomenon. And at no point in the video she ever mentions what the fuck she did to make those 2 men cry. Incidentally, I wasn't the second man, so that means that in that same week she made 2 men cry. Asher and I did not make any statements following that atrocity of a video, not for 19 days, and the record shows it, including testimony from my friends in my private Discord server, which, unlike Liana Kerzner's server, you cannot pay to get into. It only has closest friends, not 100 of my closest paying friends. And these people have been with me throughout this entire endeavor, and they kept seeing me saying, I'm not going to say anything, I'm going to give her a chance to do the right thing. And those days turned into weeks, and then Asher finally started speaking up around day 19. But by that point, we had already been identified by several individuals, including on Kiwi Farms and on Twitter, as being the people that Liana Kerzner was talking about. So from that point on, things essentially kept escalating, and they were escalated by Liana Kerzner. Asher started making public statements, trying to correct the record. I eventually joined him several weeks later, I believe in December or January, and Liana kept escalating. She kept upping the lies throughout multiple episodes, for which we have now a very detailed timeline that we have submitted to certain interested parties who are looking into the situation. I show in the evidence on my website that Liana Kerzner uses very specific markers that lets her audience know who she's talking about. And of course, in her Discord server, she discloses the identity of people. So everybody knows in her server that Stalker Chan, as she says, God, that's so just terrible, is Emily Schooley. That the gruesome twosome is Asher and me. She even says it in one screenshot where she says, one thing that the gruesome twosome missed is that I apologized to Asher, completely missing the point that it wasn't the non-apology we were angry about, but the fact that the apology actually didn't address what she actually did. So what followed was 18 months of constant escalation. Liana Kerzner lied about the contents of the very ugly fight to her Discord server, to her Patreons, to her YouTube channel, and to her radio station. Until finally, after we asked for 7 months for the record to be corrected and for Liana Kerzner to do the right thing and actually portray things as they happened, Asher published the chats. And what did Liana Kerzner do? She squealed violation of privacy. So make no mistake, this is an abuser. This is an abuser who does not want you to see what she actually does. And well, then she made the audacious claim that Asher had been abusive to her throughout their 5-year friendship, which is what led Asher to publish the entirety of his Telegram exchanges with Liana, even though they revealed very private and embarrassing things for both of them. Which, of course, Liana has now said is a campaign to humiliate her because everything is about Liana Kerzner. It's never about the effect that her lies have on other people. It's never about the fact that this woman has an audience size that she doesn't deserve and a reputation that she doesn't deserve because of her actions, and that she can weaponize that against people to silence them. But she also does it in other ways too, but we're going to get to that in just a second. So, the point that I'm going to talk about now is where Liana Kerzner essentially tried to threaten us legally into intimidating us and silencing us. Because you see, fed up with everything that she was doing, in October, I decided to start making a video showing 2 things. Because Liana Kerzner was also receiving anonymous emails that I have already established she most likely knew were not from Asher, because she was aware that Asher has a local stalker who likes to impersonate people. This is something that Asher and Liana discussed over 13 times or more throughout their 5-year friendship, and I've shown the documentation for that. Which also places that police call as a clear attempt to injure Asher, because again, she had that information. She was acting on information that she knew and chose to ignore it, instead leaning on the narrative that the crazy person was sending her threatening messages because that gave her a permission structure to be absolutely horrible to him. So to finally silence that nonsense, I made a video called Who is Harassing Liana Kerzner? Because in September, Liana Kerzner had published that Charlie Kirk death threat and essentially implied that Asher had sent it. In the video, Who is Harassing Liana Kerzner, which is a 2-parter video, that is, it's split into 2 chapters, meta chapters, because it has subchapters in there. I lay out the story of the person I identified as Mario Mattei, which was one of his pseudonyms at the time, and I gave the entire story of how we met this person to the point as to how he essentially started impersonating people and trying to get Asher in trouble, because Asher, and I am so sorry I have to say this, stopped him from taking over a B-movie rental store's independent horror filmmaker group. And yes, it sounds as petty and ridiculous as possible, but I never said that this man understood the notion of proportionate responses. And I'm talking about the stalker here. And that's kind of the issue, which Liana knows. When that Charlie Kirk death threat came in, Liana Kerzner apparently decided to use that as an excuse to send us letters from her lawyer. Now, we didn't see the letter arrive until actually after the first video was published. Liana Kerzner has claimed that we made the video as a response to the first letter coming out, but that is not true. So we received several letters and communications from Mark Bourrie, PhD, JD, barrister, and solicitor. Now, before we get into the nonsense that this man sent us, I also want to address a nonsense claim that Liana Kerzner has made, which is that we doxed her lawyer. I really want someone to take this woman by the hand and explain to her what doxing actually means. Because let me tell you something about Mark Bourrie. Aside from having an unreasonable love of trilobites, this man is a lawyer, and he is an independent lawyer. That is, he is not part of a buffet, and he's not part of any type of firm. He operates individually. Now, the Law Society of Ontario has a directory, which is a primary public resource where information about licensed legal professionals can be found. It is important to note that licensed lawyers must maintain a valid practice address with the Law Society, which is then displayed in this directory And that's a matter of public record. How do I know this? Well, let's go. Okay, so you see here, I'm going to lso.ca and going to look into the public resources and finding a lawyer or paralegal. That's something you can do. So if you search for Mark Bourrie in that directory, voila, you see what comes up? Exactly. You see his address, his phone number, his email, all of the things that he essentially okayed for the public to be able to find just by looking up his name. Not only that, but if you look for him on Lawyer Friday, the same information comes up in that listing. Now, Bourrie then claimed that publishing his address on Twitter was a violation of privacy because we published the letter. But no. If we're going to go by Liana Kerzner's own terminology, Mark Bourrie violated his own privacy by putting that information in a public register that anyone could find by looking him up. And actually, that's what we did. When we got the letters, we looked him up on the LSO website to make sure that that was actually his place of business. And in the end, public information is public because otherwise, what is it? But you see here, Liana and Mark Bourrie now exhibit the same kind of traits. When you expose their bad behavior, the first thing they cry for is confidentiality or privacy. Because there's nothing in that letter that is violating anything that is private, except if he doesn't want you to see what he says to Asher. And we'll get into that now, shall we? Yes. Now, on the website, I go through every single one of his nonsense claims one by one. I don't think I really need to go through them in the same detail as I do here, except that these are the following. He says that we have accused his clients of unprofessional and unethical conduct in her peer counseling business. This has harmed her business, leaving you open to litigation and for specific general damages. Further, we have directly contacted at least one consumer of Liana's online content with libelous false accusations, and they demand that all our defamation of Liana Kerzner stop immediately, which includes spoken defamation as well as all online defamation, etc., etc., etc. Now, of course, here comes the censure. By defamatory, we mean any and all accusations concerning Mrs. Kerzner that have not been proven in a court of law. And that right there is that bit of kernel of Canadian law that enables bullies like Liana Kerzner to operate. Because that definition of defamation is abusive. That is a presumption of guilt before being found innocent. We don't accept the applicability of Canadian defamation standards to our speech. We are citizens of the United States, where defamation law is constrained by very strong constitutional protections under the First Amendment, which are described as a false statement of fact about a person that is communicated to a third party and harms that person's reputation. Emphasis on false statement. Now, we didn't need to respond to this nonsense statement, but we gave Dr. Bourrie the benefit of the doubt. You see, Asher has wanted his interview on It's Not Therapy to be taken down, because as we have explained, he sees it and has all the right to do so as exploitative for Liana Kerzner to have his interview gaining good faith for her on behalf of the borderline personality disorder sufferers, while she does what she does. Like, leverage stigma against him and call the police on him.
I might want to give you a call. I'm being harassed by a mentally ill person in your area. I don't know where to file a police report or ask for a wellness check, quite honestly.
So, Asher drafted a very professional letter to Bourrie requesting his intervention in the matter of getting that removed. Now, because of the outrageous nature of the communication, Asher published the letter, at which point Bourrie, very, very sore, replied in an email that publishing his address on Twitter is an invasion of privacy, which we have proven it is not. Refusing to acknowledge this new nonsense accusation, Asher asked, "Thank you for providing confirmation of receipt. What is your office doing regarding my request?" Yeah, Bourrie's dismissive response was nothing. We are working on other things. Whereupon Asher responded, "You are giving me very little reason to contact you regarding your client's activities concerning her and your demands and my interest in relations to her activities. Further discouragement will eliminate all motivation to contact you, as it is proving ineffective in resolving your client's or my situation. He states that he would like to resolve things in a productive manner, but he is pointing out that Bourrie is acting in a way that is completely unproductive. Mark Bourrie, incidentally, right after Asher points out that he suffers from dysphoria on Twitter, responds with this: "Dear Miss Wolfstein, I don't care about your motivation. I'm a lawyer, not your life coach." Well, aside from the fact that Mark Bourrie apparently thinks he's Montgomery Scott, he also decides to misgender Asher. Now, this is very important because if you see on his communications prior, we have always been misters. That is very, very important because he does it again. When Asher very pointedly responds that he will not be contacting Bourrie again. Bourrie's response is, "Dear Miss Wolfstein, have your lawyer contact me." Well, first of all, we do not need to do that, as we're not actually entrenched in any legal relationship, and we're not actually under any legal obligation to contact Bourrie to speak to Liana. But we have also not contacted Liana directly either, because we have no interest in speaking to her. So, this is now twice that my husband was misgendered by Bourrie after Asher expressed dysphoria in his communications on Twitter, on his posts on Twitter. Asher's dysphoria is not related to gender. But I think it's very telling that both Mark Bourrie and Liana Kerzner recently tried to essentially imply that as well in the skeet where she claimed that otherkin and Therians have nothing in common with trans individuals. And that she implied basically that Therians and otherkin are essentially insane. Now, the response to that was kind of... there were several Therians and otherkins who are also trans who basically told her, "Hey, hold on a minute." And of course, she immediately blocked them because, listening to people, which is supposedly her job, is not Liana Kerzner's forte. Now, it is at this point that Liana Kerzner, not being able to get her way, goes on Twitter and essentially explodes. And I've already posted that Twitter explosion, but some of the things that she essentially tried to do was to try to shame us by claiming that, of course, I had Second Life boyfriends and we are non-monogamous. Yeah, she was essentially trying to leverage some sort of social shame like a 19th century matron. And then she, of course, makes the claim that we doxed her lawyer, which is again false, and that we don't get to not deal with her lawyer just because he's not nice enough to us. No, yes, actually, we do get to not deal with him, Liana. We're not in a legal relationship. And if your lawyer wants people to actually deal with him, maybe he should be something other than a bully. Just, professional notes here. After that spew, Asher pointed out that Mark Bourrie had misgendered him, at which point, on October 7th, we received the following apologetic letter. It is honestly quite insulting and all over the place, because there's a very strange blending of boundaries going on here. Like, who is talking to us? Is it Mark Bourrie? Is it Liana? Especially at the very, very end, too. So, I don't know who wrote this letter, but I know that Mark Bourrie signed it, so he must have been okay with it. But it's a mess of a letter. Now, you can go and read these letters on the website. They're under Intimidation. That's also where Asher posted the emails between himself and Bourrie. So you can read the entire thing as well as Liana's completely bonkers reaction. It became very clear from the start that the aim of the communications was not actually reaching a resolution. It was to get us to shut up. Now, we do take the claims of defamation very seriously, and I do agree with one thing. Making a claim without producing evidence to substantiate it can definitely look like defamation, right? Well, I mean, Liana does it all the time. She constantly makes allegations and accusations and insinuations on her Blue Sky thread without producing any actual evidence. But we do things differently than Liana. So after this letter is when the collating of the evidence began. Now, in her Patreon video last week, she essentially implied that we spent 18 months going through all of the records and trying to find things that are out of context to make her look bad. If you go through the website and you look at the copious evidence in there, these are not things that are out of context. Entire conversations are reproduced, entire transcripts, entire logs. These are not out of context. But of course, since Liana has told you that ours is a phishing site, of course you're not going to see it because she silos information like any cult leader would. So it is at this time that I sat down and I started organizing the evidence that we had. And that is when the genesis of the boss fight game website began. The website begins by showing the timeline of the project, and then the cancellation, and then the claims Liana has made about them and how they are false, with evidence that I provide, as well as the accountability section where I take responsibility for the delays on my side, which is something Liana Kerzner has never done for herself. Then I go over examples of Liana in conflict, and those examples are copious. The PAX incident where she gaslit Roberta Vaughn, her lying about Gail Simone, where she also violates the privacy of Mitchell Jura, her Liana Kerzner's client, who was not, and that was not a business communication. What she's done to Emily Schooley, what she's done to Song Erickson, what she was starting to do with Vagabond, which shows a pattern that repeats constantly with Liana Kerzner. Then we go into the ugly fight, the details of the argument with Poppy, and then the ugly fight with Liana that shows what I have told you about. Then the next section is this one, intimidation. Liana Kerzner, after months of lying, when she started seeing the truth being posted online, immediately resorted to trying to intimidate us legally into shutting up. Now, if we were in Canada, that might have worked. But again, now that we have produced the evidence, you'll notice that there is no letter from Mark Bourrie, because it will be very, very difficult for a court of law to find any of the evidence that is on this website to not pass muster. We know. We checked. Yes, that means we had these documents checked. And you will notice that I am very careful in distinguishing my hypothesis from the evidence that I post. I do make inferences from the evidence that is at hand, and I make very clear that this is my opinion in certain situations, because again, I don't know the mind of Liana Kerzner. She claims she can see into people's minds. I do not. I claim that I have reasonable proof to come to certain conclusions, and that the actions she takes can only be interpreted in so many ways, because I make the assumption that Liana Kerzner is a reasonable human being. So yes, since this website was launched, and the evidence therein was made available to the public to support the claims we make, because Liana in that Patreon video has claimed that we have changed the nature and content of our claims. That is not true. Anyone who has any memory, and which probably does not include members of Liana's audience by what I keep seeing, would know that that is not true. But we also have the car files of our social media accounts to prove that, as well as the testimony from members of my private friends Discord who have been watching this unfold for at least 17 or 18 months. But ever since the evidence has come to light, there's not been a peep about Mark Bourrie. And I suspect that it is because Dr. Bourrie is aware that the evidence that is presented here is not just mere hearsay, and that there are items here that can be verified, and which in fact the Kerzners themselves have verified, because you see in my website under accountability, I also point out the things that Liana Kerzner has not claimed accountability for, such as the fact that she claimed that her husband also caused delays on her end multiple times, many times, because of his mental health struggles. Conveniently, Liana Kerzner did not mention that in the cancellation video. And I mentioned that, and then she immediately started pivoting, saying that I was accusing her of being someone who was abused and accusing her of not disclosing that she was being abused. You can see the kind of pivot she takes in order to avoid accountability. Unfortunately for her, Captain Underpants on head Steven Kerszner at the sock, when he made that disastrous Kickstarter intervention, he confirmed everything I had said, that, the Kickstarter money had been accessed without authorization by him, and that he had mental health struggles. and that several things that he did came from the fact that he had unmanaged mental health symptoms, and he kindly thanked Liana for not disclosing them.
Numerous delays have mounted with this project. Some of those delays were because of the growing mental health instability of the spouse of a member of the team. This led to repeated missed deadlines, a great deal of distraction, and crossed moral boundaries.
So, what does Liana Kerzner do when the legal side of things doesn't work out for her, and her own husband steps in it so far that he's all the way up to his thigh? Well,
welfare check you've had. We're not trying to become an inconvenience to you, but yeah. So our main thing is just to see like what kind of stuff is causing her to feel concerned, and we want to just check on you. And then we're kind of the reason we didn't call you this time is we're looking to close the book on this so we don't become a burden on you, right? Because we've been here several, you've received phone calls, you've had us.
I'm going to tell you right now if I get another.
The next thing on the line is call the police. Call the police on an at-risk individual using extremely stigmatizing language, highlighting his mental illness and his unbalanced nature. And I guess, hope for the worst, right? And then, of course, subtweet about being an oppressed woman having to make up for her husband's mistakes. Incidentally, this is what she posted after I posted on Facebook that an emergency had come up and that would be gone for most of the day, because she knew she had called the police, and I'm pretty sure she assumed that I was going to spend all day elsewhere because the police took Asher away. Up until that point, she had been directly referencing Asher on her Blue Sky threads, and she suddenly did a 180. It's not a good look on her, especially since she knew what she did. So there you go. Proof that Liana Kerzner uses lawyers in order to silence people who speak up inconvenient things about her, especially if they have proof to back them up. So, where does Liana Kerzner go from here? Well, I'm going to make a prediction. Probably about tomorrow's video or Friday's, or any statement that she may make in the near future regarding the fact that she called the police on my husband to endanger him twice. And I'm going to tell you what it is. Liana Kerzner is going to blame this on a trauma response. It is exactly what she used to blame her behavior in the very ugly fight on. Now, there's a problem with this because you see, in the very early stages of this, she claimed that she was out of control, that she was terrified, that she was not actually angry, that she was just not being rational at all. Now, first of all, this has a lot of problems in it. As I have told you, I did complete 4 years of psychology before switching over to opera. So I'm not a licensed therapist, but I do have some knowledge of the material. And a trauma response does not usually de-escalate as fast as it did with Kerzner, allegedly. Because you see, the moment Asher made that second apology, Kerzner pivoted 180 in her affect, in her demeanor. She suddenly was calm, collected, perfectly eloquent. She did not make any name calls or accusations. It was as if she knew then at that point or believed that Asher was completely compliant, and therefore she didn't need to beat him down. Now, of course, this is speculation up until this point, because I now am going to show you how Liana Kerzner contradicts her own story and shows that she was not actually undergoing a trauma event, because the narrative changed. Once she felt secure in having silenced us, or she thought she had silenced us because we were working on the documentation, she started shifting the narrative. So I'm going to show you how that progression went.
Expect myself to function reasonably and rationally when I was having a trauma response. That's a dysregulated response. That's just stupid. That's asking a fish to breathe air. But characterizing my entire, she's this and she's that, and she will turn on you, treating someone's traumatic response as turning on you, that's mental health stigma. Now, does that mean it's not possible to be both? Sure. But in my case, they're using a trauma response as, she became a completely different person. No shit, Sherlock. That's what happens. That's why the only thing I control is controlling my stress levels and not going too far out over my skis. Even when I was actively trauma triggered and told the people that I was being symptomatic in the trauma. They still act like I'm just being a big bitch, you know. Which, let's face it, deliberate cruelty is a fancy thesaurus word for bitch. And that was deliberate. Yeah, probably. Probably. See, I caught myself. You stop. Yeah. Trust me, it's a pretty decent feeling when something gets really heated and fights get really ugly and people take shots at me and I get assertive back and they dump the chat logs online trying to go, she was so abusive, she was so deliberately cruel, ah! And I look back at that and go, nope, I stand by every fucking word I said there. I meant it. It was true. I thought they needed to hear it. Nope, that was me being a friend and going, brah, you out of line right there. That was not me losing it and just trying to be mean. That is a really good feeling in a shitty situation. Because was I pissed off in those moments? Fuck yeah, people were fucking around. But I was in control. And just because they were hurt by it. And to this day, I'm really not sure why it bothered them that much. To this day, I'm really not sure why it bothered them that much.
Well, there you see it. She was not in control, but she was in control. She was not angry. She was terrified, but she was actually angry. And she was not rational, but rational enough to make up lyrics that Taylor Swift could steal. Liana Kerzner's audience saw the narrative shift before their eyes and they didn't even blink. And that is cult-like behavior. And that is not something an alleged mental health professional should ever encourage. So be on the lookout because the trauma response card is about to come up. Now, having seen the evidence, if you do not believe that this person should have a radio show where she pretends to be a mental health advocate, go ahead and email Saga FM with your concerns. There is a petition also where you can make your voice heard that will be going up soon. Next time, we're going to pick up on the gaslighting because the next story is a very important one. Don't worry, we're almost done with these videos. The evidence is coming out, and it's very important that the record be established. I didn't want to have to do this. I am not a drama tuber, but because she silenced me on Blue Sky, and I have already shown you proof that her community does that. She got Kat Clements also suspended for violating anti-harassment regulations by showing proof that Liana Kerzner was harassing us. Make that make any sense? Because of that, this is where I'm putting everything. I will see you next time. I hope you have a good rest of your week.